Oh, the 1980s, that desolate wasteland, the graveyard of Prague. Yeah, I was out of the prog rock thing big time by 1978. Tormato and Love Beach pretty much did me in. Throw in, and then there were three from Genesis, and I was pretty much done with prog rock. There were so many other newer bands doing really interesting things, but there was like that little last gasp syndrome going on. The early part of the decade, you saw some really great albums from those classic bands, from that classic era. But, you had ELP broken up, you had Gentle Giant broke up, Yes went commercial, Genesis went commercial, Pink Floyd put out a couple albums in the 80s, Jethro Tull did 5 albums in the 80s, but none of this was capital P Prog. Really the masters of the 80s. You got to give it to Rush. They figured it out. They popped up a little bit late and they put out some of their best material in the 80s. Not necessarily true of the bands from the 70s. A lot of them, the 80s were not real kind to, but a couple things did happen in the 80s, which, makes it not quite as dismal and bleak as I thought. You had the whole new wave movement where a lot of bands were going from punk to something a little bit more interesting. Bands like XTC, The Talking Heads, Ultravox, Tears for Fears. Heck, you can even throw in Kate Bush and Peter Gabriel into that kind of grouping because the 80s were definitely a whole different thing than the 70s. Then you had the neo-prog movement, bands like Marillion and IQ and Palace and Pendragon and Jadis and 12th Night. Definitely made a huge impact in the 80s. Progressive metal was born in the 80s where, we don't really talk a whole lot about prog metal here, but you got to give it its due because bands like King's X and Fate's Warning and Queensryche led to Dream Theater, which in turn led to things like Spock's Beard and Transatlantic. So we definitely want to give that subgenre its due. And then you had some markets that were a little bit late to the symphonic progressive sound. South America, Eastern Europe, Eastern Asia, Japan in particular. There was a lot of really cool stuff going on in the 80s. And then you had the whole avant-garde movement, the Rio stuff, the Zool stuff was going strong in the 80s. You had bands like Universe Zero and the 5UUs and Thinking Plague and Universe Zero, and Magma was still going in the 80s. So there was a lot of that going on for sure. But one thing we definitely saw was the decline of the quality of the album covers. So yeah, let's think about it, people. We went from this cool kind of thing to this. The 70s and the 80s looked a whole lot different, although that King Crimson album is 69, whatever. You had bands going from cool album covers like this in the 70s to crap like this in the 80s. Got one more example. In the 70s, Yes albums looked like this. In the 80s, Yes albums looked like this. So, the quality of the album covers definitely went down too. But it wasn't just the record labels or the record buying public that was spurring this move into more commercial and accessible type of materials. The consumers definitely wanted it. The record labels definitely wanted it. But the one thing we don't really focus on and talk a whole lot about is these bands wanted it too. They wanted success. They wanted money. They wanted fame. They wanted all their hard work to pay the bills for once. So you can't really blame them for wanting that. Most of these bands have been at it for a long time. So were the 80s really all that bad? We're going to go through the top 25 albums of the 80s. And we also got to look at, maybe prog was dead in the 80s, but Yes got their only Grammy in the 80s. Genesis got their only Grammy in the 80s. Jethro Tull got their only Grammy in the 80s. And Rush got nominated in 1981. They lost out to The Police, which is actually pretty appropriate if you think about it. So, what were the best albums of the 80s? The best prog albums of the 80s? We're going to start right now with number 25, and it's King's X and Gretchen Goes to Nebraska from 1989. This is a band from Springfield, Missouri. This was their second album while being called King's X. They went under a different name earlier. Their first album was Out of the Silent Planet, which is really cool, based on a C.S. Lewis novel. Iron Maiden actually did a song called Out of the Silent Planet later on. And these guys just dropped a new album in 2022 on Inside Out called Three Sides of One. Really good, really important band. At number 24, here's a weird one. Out of Japan, it's Pazzo Fanfano di Musica. And this is out of Japan. It's all sung in Italian. The album cover looks Italian. It's just an homage to the great Italian bands. It's just really fun. A lot of orchestration. This was kind of like a super group. There were 10 people in this band from various Japanese bands, Mr. Cyrus, Vienna, Magdalena, Deja Vu. I don't know any of those bands, but I really like this album. At number 23, we're talking about the weirdest band you could ever imagine. The Rio band from Belgium. It's Universe Zero. And their album Used, it's their fourth album. If you don't know Universe Zero, it's chamber music. It's so weird. It's so bizarre. I really do enjoy what they do. This band is led by the drummer Daniel Dennis. And yeah, they are Rio, but they definitely flirt with Zool. This is my favorite album from them because you've got more synthesizers, you've got electric guitars. It's kind of got a Middle Eastern feel. Real strong album. At number 22, we're going back to the ersatz progressive metal scene, that nascent scene that was growing in the U.S. primarily. Queensryche's Operation Mindcrime from 1988 was a huge seller for the band. It was their third album. Their fourth album would sell even more, Empire, because it had that Silent Lucidity song on there. Everybody thought it was Pink Floyd, but it wasn't. It was Queensryche. But we're talking about Operation Mindcrime, the great concept album. It follows the protagonist Nikki, and there was in fact a part 2 in 2006, 6 years before Jeff Tate and the band got themselves into one heck of a whirlwind of a conflict. I don't know, the legal battles are probably still going on to this day. At number 21, we're talking about that neo-prog scene in the UK, and it's Palace and their first album, The Sentinel. What a great album cover. This was done by Patrick Woodruff, who had also done Sad Wings of Destiny for Judas Priest. Such an amazing album cover. This thing was produced by Eddie Offord, giving it even more classic prog bona fides. The record label really messed the band up here. It was supposed to be the Atlanta suite that they were playing live, but they wanted a bunch of commercial stuff in there too. So they acquiesced, and the album isn't nearly as strong as it should have been, but I really like it. At number 20, it's Supertramp and Brother, Where You Bound? Yeah, this is the one without Roger Hodgson. Yeah, he is missed. You just don't replace a guy that good. But Ray Davies does his best. Rick Davies does his best to hold the fort down, and I really, really like this album a lot. I like it better than the one that came out before it, primarily because of two things. The first single was a song called Cannonball, and that was fantastic. And then on side 2, you've got the 16-minute long title track with the great David Gilmour in tow. Really, really special album. Fantastic. I really like it. At number 19, let's go to Sweden in a Zool-related band. It's Cultivator, and the name of this album is Barndomen Stigar. I really like it. It's just Zool enough to keep the weirdos happy, but it's got just enough, stuff like a Canterbury kind of influences going on in here. There's some other like fusion-y things going on here. So it is kind of Zool meets Canterbury, if you will, but it's a lot of fun. Sam La Mamas Mana comes to mind sometimes on some of these tracks, that great band, but I love it. At number 18, let's get heavy again, and it's Fate's Warning and their fifth album, Perfect Symmetry from 1989. Yeah, Fate's Warning is one of those seminal progressive metal bands that really set the table for the entire third wave of prog to happen. Jim Mateos on guitar, Ray Adler's voice. You got Kevin Moore playing keyboards on this thing before he moved on over to Dream Theater. Mark Zonder on drums and Joe Tobias on bass. Great lineup, great album. This is probably the most progressive album they did, and that's why it's here, because it's just amazing. At number 17, Let's go to Germany and the great Anyone's Daughter and their fourth album, In Blue. Yeah, the band took their name from a Deep Purple song, but they don't sound a whole lot like Deep Purple. They actually sound more like their German compatriots like Aloy and Novelist. Really strong. Their first album came out in 79, Adonis. The next couple records were okay, but this one here, yeah, it is dynamite. This band was formed in Stuttgart. They sing in German. I really enjoy it. It's symphonic. It's great at number 16. We're at 16 already? Okay, it's Captain Beefheart and Ice Cream for Crow, his 12th and final album. And this album actually benefited from Frank Zappa not allowing Beefheart to use some of the songs from the Shiny Bat Puller album, which were supposed to be on this. He wanted to cut some corners and use some songs that had already been used, but Zappa said no, so he had to go back on the drawing board and record some new stuff, and it is just amazing. And special mention to Cliff Martinez on drums. Yeah, you know Cliff Martinez from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and his drumming on this album is so special. I just wish Captain Beefheart had done a few more. At number 15, it's Kate Bush and her masterpiece, Hounds of Love from 1985. You all know the song from Stranger Things, Running Up That Hill, but that is not why this album is ranked this high. It is ranked this high because of side 2, the Ninth Wave, that great progressive suite that she put together. This is easily the proggiest thing she's ever done, but there's some other great songs on here besides that. You've got Cloud Bursting, you've got The Big Sky, and of course the big hit, Kate Bush. Just amazing. Great album. At number 14, let's talk about Iron Maiden and their 7th album, The Seventh Son of the Seventh Son. Again, is it prog? Yeah, well, prog metal is a big part of the 80s prog rock story, and Iron Maiden is as prog as any of them. They were bigger than, those other bands like King's X or Fate's Warning or, Dream Theater. Those bands actually were amazing bands, but they didn't sell the kind of records, the kind of numbers that Iron Maiden did. And this is their concept album. This is their proggy masterpiece based on the Orson Scott Carol novel. It's just amazing. I love it. They did some proggy stuff, like Power Slave had Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Somewhere in Time had Alexander the Great, but this whole album is proggy, start to finish. I love it. And number 13, let's go to Japan and Kenzo 2. What an amazing band this is. I love Kenzo. They're kind of jazzy. They're kind of fusiony. Imagine Brand X maybe mixing with Focus a little bit, but then you throw in some very, very idiosyncratic Japanese phrasings in terms of song structure, melodies, rhythm. You can definitely tell this band's from Japan. It's a lot of fun. They're just amazing. You pick any Kenzo album. They're all good. Kenzo 2 might be my favorite. Big shout out to Yoshihisa Shimizu, who is the leader of the band. Just incredible. At number 12, it's Camel and Nude. Yeah, this one was a nice little surprise because the 3 albums that preceded Nude were not great. 1977's Rain Dances was okay. 1978's Breathless, even Kit Watkins couldn't save that thing. 1979, I Can See Your House From Me. No, that was the one with Kit Watkins, my bad. I didn't like any of them really. They had a couple songs each that were good, but now we get to 1981, and the last album with Andy Ward on drums, Andy Latimer comes through, and Nude is just a great, great album about a Japanese soldier that doesn't know World War II's over. It's just great. Andy Latimer, Andy Ward, Colin Bass. You got Mel Collins. You got Duncan McKay. You got Jan Shellhouse. It's an all-star lineup, and it's a really, really good album. And number 11, we're going to South America and Los Jaivas. This band was named because they thought it'd be cool to try to use like an English thing. High bass was what, but it's not pronounced that way. It's just a real silly thing. But this is like their 6th album or something like that. It's called Alturos de Machu Picchu, and they use a lot of Andean folk melodies and weave in a lot of symphonic stuff. It's just really cool. South American prog from Chile. These guys were from a town called Vina del Mar in Chile. Wonderful stuff. I definitely need to do a deep dive on South American prog because there's so much out there I don't know. At number 10, let's do Genesis Duke. Yeah, this was their last foray into prog. After Duke, there was precious little prog in Genesis's music. But Duke has plenty of it. That Duke Suite alone is one of my favorite pieces of music of all time. I put that right up there with Supper's Ready or Cinema Show. It's just phenomenal. I really dig it a lot. Good stuff. At number 9, let's do some more neo-prog, and it's IQ and their second album, The Wake. Yeah, everybody knows that Radiohead picture where the boys in Radiohead are standing in front of a poster of IQ's The Wake. It's pretty cool. I could have put their first album on here, 1983's Tales from a Lush Attic. Really strong album, but I like The Wake even better because it's got songs like Widow's Peak and Outer Limits and The Magic Roundabout. This is a great lineup for the band because you had Peter Nichols, Mike Holmes, Tim Isu, Martin Orford, and Paul Cook, the classic IQ lineup. And this is just a phenomenal record. Before they tried some different things, went a little commercial, and came back strong later on. At number 8, it's Yes Drama, the one that made Yes fans rich all around the world, but they were dead wrong. Drama's an amazing album. Yeah, Jeff Downes and Trevor Horn replaced John Anderson and Rick Wakeman, but they do a fine job, and I wish they would have done a couple more albums. I wish the UK crowds would have been a little bit kinder to the Buggles. I guess they took a whole lot of heat when they played live. The whole concerts, people are just screaming and yelling at them, throwing stuff, so I don't blame them for not wanting to carry it on, but I wish they would have. At number 7, let's go to Poland and SBB and Memento Z Bansalnen Triptychium. Whatever, man. It's Polish, symphonic, fusion-y prog at the highest level. These guys kind of took a 20-year hiatus after this 1981 release dropped. But to me, to these ears, this is the best thing they ever did. I haven't heard all their albums because they got like 20 of them, but I've heard most of them, and this one is just incredible. Yeah, it's symphonic fusion. What does SBB stand for? I think it means Silesian Blues Band, but I guess they had another acronym that they supposedly, SBB translates into. I have no idea. Just check out the album. You will not be sorry. At number 6, it's Cardiacs. Oh, yeah. I can't talk about Prog in the 80s without mentioning Cardiacs. And the album I'm going to spotlight here is their second album, On Land and in the Sea. This was the final album with that classic 6-member lineup. William D. Drake left the band after this album, but he would contribute in other ways. So you got Tim Smith, you got Jim Smith, you got Sarah Smith, you got William Drake, you got Tim Quee and Dominic Luckman. This is the classic Cardiacs lineup, and this album is just bonkers. I love it. Check it out if you don't know them. Can't go wrong with Cardiacs. At number 5, let's go to Hungary and Mars Belly Chronikek. The Martian Chronicles. What a great album this is from 1984. Probably my favorite Hungarian album that I've ever heard. Granted, I haven't heard a whole lot of them, but this one just is amazing. I really like it. There's great symphonic action going on in here. It's all based on the Ray Bradbury story. These guys were kind of like a hidden gem nobody knew about until they came to the States in 95 and played at Prog Fest. And, if Tangerine Dream rocked like Jethro Tull, they might sound just a little bit like Solaris. What a cool album. Definitely check it out. At number 4, let's go back to South America, shall we? And Baca Marte with The Pois du Fim from 1983. My favorite Brazilian prog album. This thing is just bonkers. It's incredible. Obviously influenced by a lot of the great Italian bands, Premiata Fornaria Marconi and Quella Vecchia Locanda and Locanda della Fate come to mind immediately, but this is just a musician's band, just fantastic, just phenomenal musicianship. They were formed in Rio de Janeiro in 1974, and this was their only album. I guess they had a second album that came out like in 1999. I've never heard it, so for all intents and purposes, this band was a one and done, but wow, what a one, huh? At number 3, Oh, yeah, kids, it's King Crimson Discipline. Robert Fripp decided to get the band back, so he kept Bill Bruford, but he added to it Adrian Belew and Tony Levin, and they put out a trio of albums in the 80s, which are just great, the best of which is Easily Discipline, Beaten, Three of a Perfect Pair. Nice, but this one's great. And the shock factor, man, hearing this new version of Talking Heads, I'd never heard anything like it, kind of Talking Heads, but blown up to the nth degree, just amazing, very, very cool at number 2. Let's go to the UK and Marillion's Clutching at Straws, the 4th and final album with the Great Fish on vocals. This song yielded 4 top 20 hits in the UK. You had Incommunicado, Sugar Mice, and Warm Wet Circles. Great songs. Not every song on here is great. Tells the tale of Torch, who's this guy. I guess he's kind of similar to the Jester figure in the first album. But, this guy's a drunk, hangs out in the bars, and just has a miserable life. And Mark Wilkinson's artwork, just phenomenal. One of the great, great neo-prog albums of all time. Love it. Absolutely love it. At number 1, there can only be number 1, boys and girls. And yeah, I'm going to Canada and Rush Moving Pictures from 1981. Yeah, Rush definitely figured the 80s out better than any other prog band. They figured out a new style, they figured out a new sound, and they foraged forth into the 80s with great aplomb and great success, where a lot of the bands that I loved in the 70s just couldn't finagle that number. Rush definitely owned the 80s in the prog rock sphere, and Moving Pictures was their best album in the 80s. Absolutely. Why wouldn't it be? You've got, the recording in the studio up there at Les Studio. They got Hugh Simon. They got Terry Brown. Everybody's here. And apparently they were going to do a live album after Permanent Waves, but they started writing some great material, so they're like, well, I guess we're gonna do another studio album, and thankfully they did. I did like that 4 studio albums, then a live album kind of thing that they had going on there for a while. But yeah, Rush was the band that dominated the 80s like no other. Absolutely. So who'd I miss? Nuova Era, La Ultima Viaggio should have been on there. Peter Gabriel 3 probably should have been on there. Art Zoid, Berlin, I love that album. That probably should have been on there. Gentle Giant Civilian. Pat Metheny, how about As Falls Wichita, So Falls Wichita Falls? I love that album. Asia Minor, Between Flesh and Divine, the great Japanese symphonic band Midas's first album came out in 88, Beyond the Clean Air. But those were the ones that I know I missed and that I felt kind of funny about leaving off, but I know I missed a whole bunch more, so I'm counting on you freaks to help me out with that and give me a real good database on all the great prog that came out in the 80s, because honestly, I wasn't paying attention, man. I really wasn't, and I know a lot of you weren't either. So anyway, that's my wrap-up of the 25 best prog rock albums of the 80s. Let me know what you think. Anyway, I am Scott. I love you guys. Peace in the Middle East. God save the king. And the ghosts of Nancy Reagan and Margaret Thatcher floating around out there. Hi. Have a good day.